Hello and welcome to Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and this is the fourth episode and final episode in our series Fright Light non-horror horror movies. Today we'll be talking about NIGHTCRAWLER from 2014.
You have a good eye.
Thank you. I'm just beginning, so praise from someone such as yourself, well, you can imagine that it means quite a lot.
Well, I'll help in any way I can. And of course, you can help me by calling us first. I want you to contact me when you have something.
Something like this.
That's right.
Bloody.
Well, that's only part of it. We like crime. I mean, not all crime. Carjacking in Compton, for example. That isn't news now, is it? We find our viewers are more interested in urban crime, creeping into the suburbs. What that means is a victim, or victims, preferably well off and white, injured at the hands of the poor or a minority.
Just crime.
No, accidents play, cars, buses, trains, planes, fires.
But bloody.
Well, graphic. The best and clearest way that I can phrase it to you, Lou, to capture the spirit of what we air, is think of our newscast as a screaming woman running down the street with her throat cut.
I understand. I'm a very, very quick learner. You will be seeing me again.
NIGHTCRAWLER is a 2014 neo-noir psychological thriller film written and directed by Dan Gilroy in his directorial debut. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal as Louis Lou Bloom, a stringer who records violent events late at night in Los Angeles on the vampire shift, and sells the footage to a local television news station.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Indeed, if it bleeds, it leads.
So Jake Gyllenhaal, just to start it off, is so good. I just want to say, playing these kind of intense, obsessed characters, like I just love when he, we've seen it in like Donnie Darko, we've seen it in Zodiac, we see it again here in Full Force, where he's playing more of a, I guess, I don't know if you, I mean, you could say evil, I guess, for this character. He's pretty despicable. Certainly a darker character than we're used to seeing him portray.
Well, it was interesting since we're diving right into Jake Gyllenhaal, because I think this movie is inseparable.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's like you can't talk about this movie without talking about Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, I mean he's in every single scene in the
right.
movie. The whole thing kind of relies on him. Mm-hmm. But just as Jake Gyllenhaal, the actor, it's interesting because I was doing some research on him before and just thinking about other movies I've seen him in, and it's interesting with this series because I came to the realization that you could probably do an entire Fright Light series just on Jake Gyllenhaal. It is a weird thing because I don't know. I mean, maybe he's done them, but I can't think of a single just Jake Gyllenhaal horror movie. But he did Donnie Darko, NIGHTCRAWLER, he did Enemy, he did Prisoners. Yeah. He kind of does a lot of these kind of movies. So I don't know.
Zodiac again is another one.
Zodiac. So maybe I don't know. Yeah. Just if you like this kind of movie and you like Jake Gyllenhaal, then there's a whole treasure trove of non-horror horror movies for you out there. Mm-hmm. But getting back to NIGHTCRAWLER.
So well, I mean, I guess we'll mention that. I guess this film might be seen as an odd choice. I think even I had to think about it for a while. Like, does this really fit with especially since we're ending the series with it. With the non-horror horror films, and I think even though it might seem like an odd choice, like really when it comes down to it, as you said, Jeremy, I think you said the ideology presented in this film is really horrifying, and I agree.
Yeah,
I think the implications of it are pretty horrific, and it's also another reason I wanted to do this film is because it is more of a modern cult film, which we don't get to discuss very often on the show, and that's why we thought it would be a good one to close out the series. So I think this is the most recent movie we've talked about, and for different reasons. I mean, a lot of cult films obviously are older because they're it takes time to build that cult reputation and audience and everything. But this one, it's safe to say this is a cult film, and I think it has almost completely to do with Jake Gyllenhaal's performance, also the writing. The writing is just very good, and the dialogue is very good in this film. The subject matter, as horrifying as Jake Gyllenhaal's performance is, the subject matter of this film is very, it's very interesting to me. It's something that I've explored in both my own film and writing projects. So that's why I'm sort of drawn to this film. Actually, I was saying to you, Jeremy, like I was, whether or not we were going to do this film on the show, I actually wanted to rewatch this movie. I just had like that feeling that I wanted to see it again, and I think it's because I'm just very interested in the subject matter of that sort of blurring of the line between creator and subject, and the difference between capturing something, or in this case, like filming something, and provoking it into being. That's something that, and different like various projects of my own, I've kind of, I don't know, I just find that topic very interesting, very engaging, so, and also as a creator, someone who makes things, I'm constantly thinking about that. Do you find yourself contemplating that at all with your own filmmaking or anything like that?
Yeah, totally. I think so I think with this, I'm definitely into that idea. I think I've been talking about a lot lately too, is just this this idea between like fiction and reality, and things that are presented as reality that are maybe fiction, and things that are sometimes presented as fiction that cross over into reality. And I think that this movie, essentially, when it comes down to it, this character, Lou Bloom, is in a way a documentarian.
Or is it Louis Bloom?
Or Louis, yeah. He would probably want to be called Louis, but depending on who he's talking to.
Exactly.
But he is essentially a documentarian, and I think one of the things that's interesting, less on the horror side but more ideologically, is this kind of idea of how we present truths, which is interesting too, because of when this movie was made in 2014. Obviously, we had the 24-hour news cycle. We were pretty deep in it. But I think a few years later, culturally, we saw a big shift where discussions about the news and reliability of the news became a lot more prevalent. And I think this movie, coming back to it, that was something that I found myself interested in a lot more. Just having gone through the past, whatever, 8 or 9 years since this came out.
I also I saw the connection with cell phone footage also, that we now cell phone footage is all over the news. Like
that's true.
They use it
that's another
just,
thing.
Almost with every story, or every major story. So it's interesting. Kind of, and that's something that in 2014, I mean, obviously it was around, but it wasn't as prolific as
I think there was still a hesitancy. I mean, I know I think another reason why this movie is kind of fascinated me, and why I was excited about this too, is I work as a photographer a lot. Right. So anything that is about people who make a living off of like taking images is interesting to me. And as a photographer, I know that I don't do a lot of news work, but I know that that's been a big thing. Is a lot of news photographers have been put out of business because newspapers realized that at least the smaller newspapers, I don't think the New York Times is doing this, or LA Times, or whoever, but the smaller newspapers realized they could just send their reporters out with a cell phone, and they could snap a few pictures. And for digital articles where it doesn't actually have to like look great, it's almost like, I think they kind of go for the philosophy, like less of the photos telling the story, and more just we get as many photos as we can, and that's how we tell the story. So there's been a kind of paradigm shift there. So it's also interesting because, and one thing that to me makes this film feel culty is it's recent, but also in a way a bit of a relic of a bygone era that's still happening.
It was almost right before that whole explosion happened. Not that
these kind of guys don't still exist. They definitely do, and they're still out there. But I think there's definitely a difference, especially because when it comes to crime, I think crime and how people deal with law enforcement, I think there is, like you mentioned, such an instinct for people now to pull out their phones and record anything that's going on. Like any major world event that happens,
no matter how dangerous or
dangerous, macabre, like it's just it's just one of those things.
It's like second nature to just pull out cell phone.
It's like we almost now I think the thing that happens a lot more is someone will just get some footage, and I know we're going on a tangent immediately before even getting into the story, but that's what this is about. But I think what happens a lot now is someone will just record something on their phone and post it online, and then a publication or a news channel will reach out to them, and like it's almost turned your average citizen into Lou Bloom in a weird way. Because people know that. I think, but I think there's a thing where people know these days, if you're somewhere where something's happening and you get it on video, it's like, I don't think people are doing that from a documentarian point of view. I don't think people are pulling their phones out because they say, this is historically significant and I need to document it. They're doing it because they know if they catch something crazy and then post it on social media, they'll get a lot of action. So
I don't think Lou Bloom cares too much about art, for sure.
No. Although he's very into framing.
Well, framing,
apparently.
yeah, and steady. You got to keep your hands steady.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. As a, I know exactly what you're talking about. As a freelance videographer, I feel that pain of, I could just film it myself, because whereas before, people would just assume any event, you just have you have a videographer, but now it's like, well, I mean, we have a lot of people with cell phones. Maybe we can just point a cell phone and click, record. So, so no, I definitely. I think there has been a big change, even though this is 2014, and again, the most recent movie we've talked about. There has been, it's further away than we probably even think, and there has been a lot of advancements.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we're talking about a year ago.
It was almost a decade. Yeah, I know. In my head, it's like not that, but
because I remember this movie coming
exactly.
out.
Yeah,
it's not it's not like talking about something it's not like Eraserhead.
Yeah, I know
where,
exactly. Yeah,
it's like this. I was a functional adult
exactly.
When this movie came out. Young adult, but yeah.
No, yeah. So
let's dig a little bit into the story.
Well, as we mentioned, Jake Gyllenhaal is the main character, and again, he's in essentially almost every scene, and he plays Louis Bloom. And as you said, it's Stringer. So he becomes a Stringer through the course of the movie, like in the beginning. Because now I want to talk about the beginning because so the beginning is very interesting because when that first scene, when he essentially he attacks a man. We don't know what he's doing at first, but I guess he's stealing like supplies from a construction yard or something like that.
It's implied that he steals and flips car parts or something along those lines. Yeah.
So I had forgotten that the film opens this way. Because I always, same. When I thought back on the film, I had thought of it as like this sort of slow build toward him becoming this evil character. But he's actually evil from that very first scene, which is at first I was like, okay. But the more I thought about it and the more I looked into the making of the film and their philosophy behind it, where they did not want the main character to have any sort of traditional character arc at all. That makes complete sense. It's like, from that opening scene, everything you need to know about Louis Bloom.
He's a true blue sociopath from the moment
he is, and he's a criminal and immoral and all of that. So what happens is he's trespassing in this I guess construction yard, and a security guard comes up to him and what are you doing? Shining a light on him. And now there's an interesting detail here where. And I like this. I thought it was a nice little detail of Lou looking and kind of noticing the guard's watch that he's wearing. And in the very next scene, you see him start to assault the guard and it kind of cuts away. And then in the very next scene, he's wearing the watch. So it's like he just, it's like he sees something he wants and he takes it. And that's like the philosophy throughout the film in a way for him.
Yeah, we get his MO.
That's his MO, yeah. And it's just interesting because again, like I always thought of it as a slow escalation of his character's intensity and obsessiveness and all this, but really, it's on full display there in that first scene.
Yeah,
he's already scary.
It doesn't seem like that much of a jump in a weird way to do what he did later.
Exactly,
and just hitting some guy and taking his watch. Like obviously, if anything. I think, with the exception of the very last scene, hitting a guy and taking his watch is almost worse than just exploiting people.
Yeah.
Like, but, obviously it escalates in terms of the level of violence, but we also don't know how badly he beats that guy up. We don't see it. So it is that thing where it's like, there's an escalation in terms of our eyes, but you kind of get the feeling that Lou has been doing things for years.
Yeah.
And has...
We don't know the backstory, which is another thing that I like about this movie.
Don't get a hint. We don't get a hint that he has any life before this.
Right. And the scenes of him, when it's just him by himself at home or in his apartment or whatever, it's either him watering his plant or kind of just staring at the TV. I mean, there is one very short scene where he's screaming into the mirror and breaking it, which is interesting. I wanted to talk about that because that's the only scene that's really like that. But mostly it's just him kind of doing his thing, and there's no internal narration or anything like that, and you really get no backstory at all, which I think was a smart move for this movie. I think it's certainly something that works in the movie's favor, and it's also something that you rarely see, for lots of reasons. But and look, I'm not saying backstory isn't good and you can't have it in any film, but I think sometimes films can, and also TV series and different things can get bogged down in that. So there's something sort of refreshing and just original about just presenting this character as we would see him going about this particular story.
Yeah. So I think it's cool too just meeting him like this, because if we're dealing with a sociopathic character, I mean, like I can't say I have too much personal experience with sociopath. Well, I don't know, but I mean, there've definitely been people in my life that I've met, but if I kind of got that vibe, I tried to not keep them in my life for too long. But I think with that said, it kind of makes sense that someone like this, we wouldn't need a lot of backstory. There wouldn't be a lot of friends around, because you kind of get the feeling that he's probably someone who alienates people pretty quickly. He's not an easy. So I think it kind of makes sense, because it's like, I would venture to guess that he probably doesn't really have a relationship with family.
Probably not.
It doesn't seem like he could really manage a relationship with a partner, in a healthy way where they actually want to be there for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't see him hanging around with friends or anything like that.
It just seems like he's someone who would alienate pretty much everyone pretty quickly, unless there's some other reason for them to be around.
Unless there's some gain for him.
Unless there's some gain for him, or some gain for them to tolerate him, which ultimately we kind of see as we go further along. So to me, I really like that we just came in like this, because it's one of those things where we don't really need backstory, but it's also like, I don't know if there really is much more backstory than
what else,
this is who he is.
What else do you need to know? But other than that opening scene, what else do you need to really know?
Maybe there's something in his childhood or something like that, because I know with sociopaths, they're generally like become sociopaths. Right. They're not born sociopaths.
Yeah, so
but it's like,
when I was researching it, they had a whole backstory worked out. I don't know if it was from the very beginning of the filmmaking process, or if they came up with it sort of later, but they just, it was a conscious decision of theirs not to present it in the film at all, which again I think works for this movie very well. I also enjoy movies that are about anti-heroes, not just movies, any sort of like media. Someone who's unlikable or unsympathetic, like an unsympathetic narrator in a novel or something like that. And again, like the lack of backstory or lack of any redeeming qualities really is very interesting. Again, I think Jake Gyllenhaal, I mean, this might be just a personal thing. I find him very likable. Like as an actor, I just, I find him likable. So, at first it's almost like you want to like him, but really by the end of the movie, there's just no way you can really justify if you...
Well, I think there's a thing with the way they started, and I think a lot of this plays off of our expectations and experience as viewers, is that when you see someone like that starting off a movie doing something evil, but that's your main character, and that's an actor who in the past we've seen play kind of more emotional roles where we're rooting for him. It's like, I think the knee-jerk reaction is, okay, he's like this now, but through this journey he goes on, he's going to figure it out and be better. And that makes us kind of root for him. But at a certain point we start to say, oh no, like, he's not getting any better, he's not gonna have a moral awakening, but we're already so deep in it by that point that it doesn't matter. We're just lost in the story.
Here it is. So I actually found the part, or when I was doing the research about mentions this scene. So let me just read this real quick. So let's see. Gilroy did not give Lou a character arc, as he believed that people develop their ideals at a certain point in their life and that they stay that way regardless of what happens. This is depicted in the opening scene of the film when Lou attacks a security guard, which informs the audience that Lou is a criminal and not someone who lost his morality as a result of the job. Lou's backstory was purposefully left out of the script, as Gilroy felt that without one, the audience would create their own backstories for Lou and become more engaged with the character. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we were discussing there. So that's interesting. Not someone who lost his morality as a result of the job. That's important. That's important. It's because that shows you that he just is this kind of person. So
it's almost like he spawned.
It's like the Joker.
This kind of mythic. It gives him this kind of mythic quality. Like he just appeared in a junkyard one night,
which I like. I think that's
went on this. It's just
it's cool
because I think there's something. It's almost like a Patrick Bateman kind of thing or something like that, where these characters that almost are like more idea driven than an individual driven.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I'm not saying these people don't, like, a person like Luke Bloom doesn't exist. We know these people exist, but I think that he's almost archetypal in a good way, where he kind of represents this lack of human sympathy and empathy. and he just like emerges from the depths of hell to explore contemporary culture for a little bit.
I like that. It's funny, like you mentioned American Psycho. That's another film we've talked about on the show, and it is very similar to that. And then the novel that was based on was about this clearly unsympathetic narrator. Who is also the
although
main
in a weird way, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I kind of feel for Patrick Bateman more than I feel for Lou Bloom, because Patrick Bateman, at least it seems like he's trying.
He kind of cracks at the end, I guess, and sort of.
Yeah, he it seems like he's kind of trying to fit into something, and that's what makes him a little psychotic. Is like he's looking for something real.
He's a victim of the times,
yeah, like he's someone who's stuck in something and trying to feel something, but is so numbed out that he can't. Whereas this guy, it's like
Patrick Bateman also has a narration in that film.
Yeah,
and he realizes that he cannot feel, which is something that we don't even. Yeah. With Lou Bloom, we don't even know if that's a thought in his mind at all,
like Patrick Bateman's more tragically sociopathic. Lou Bloom is just that's just his state. It's just how
he's a hard worker. That's who he is.
Yeah, he's a hard worker.
Who am I?
Yeah.
I'm a hard worker. So I mean, just to kind of get into the story a little bit more. So we have that opening scene, which is very interesting, where he attacks a security guard, and then we go to the next scene where he's essentially not only selling the materials that he's stolen, but also applying for a job at the same time. And he does not get hired because they don't hire criminals. And this is what causes him to sort of, he's driving home and passes by an automobile accident, gets out of the car, I guess just out of curiosity or because, I don't know, he's a psychopath. I'm not really sure.
He's intrigued.
He's intrigued. He senses human suffering. So, but he watches these people.
Or maybe he's like, maybe there'll be a spare hubcap roll.
Or that.
Somewhere that
who knows? Again, like we don't know. We don't know why he got out of the car.
We know he didn't pull over to help the guy.
No, we know that for sure. But he's clearly intrigued. And he's intrigued by the camera people that are filming the accident scene. It's a line of work that he can get into. Apparently, he sees himself in that kind of line of work. So, he has there's a scene where he's talking to the camera person played by Bill Paxton. I forget his character name, but in just a little exchange there, and he kind of pops up throughout the movie as sort of like the veteran stringer. And now, when we say stringer, we're referring to. What is the actual definition of that? Is it just
I believe
photojournalist or videographer?
A stringer is a freelance journalist, photographer, or videographer who contributes, reports, photos et al. To a news organization.
Okay, so that's what Lou. He sort of discovers this is even a job, and then it seems like something he can get into. So he, so I like how he actually gets his camera. He steals a bike. Which makes sense, right?
Which, by the way, just a quick note, I love how that was done.
Yeah.
Because you just have this shot, I think it's like Venice Beach or something, and he's just sitting there, and a guy rides up on a nice bike, like, and you just see him look once, and then we just cut to him riding the bike around a pawn shop. Yeah. It's because that could have been a whole sequence. But we don't need to see how Lou does things.
Exactly. This film is very...
We just need to know that he does it.
It's very economical. I felt like it was... It's not like it's sort of like on the longer side, not too long, but it goes by
2 hours.
Yeah, but it goes by at a rapid pace, because everything you're seeing is like what you need to see, sort of. Yeah.
Well, and I think with a scene like that, it perfectly encapsulates how the film and the filmic language is a representation of Lou, because it's like
that's true.
I think I think to see Lou doing it and taking the bike. We need to see some kind of nerves or something like that, or some kind of consideration. If we were dealing with a more human character, we would see that, oh, is this wrong? There, but I need to do it. Yeah. And with Lou, it's just like, we don't need to see him do it because it doesn't matter.
It's like an afterthought. Yeah, it's like, it doesn't even matter to him.
It's like, oh, there's a bike. I'm going to take the bike. There's no consideration.
Yeah, I need a bike. Yeah. This is how I'm going to get it. So he steals the bike, and we don't know how. And he pawns it for a camera, and that's how he ends up starting to take his camera around, and he starts trying to find, so I think at this point he gets the police scanner, right? So he can hear
he pawns the bike for a camera.
I'm sorry, for a camera and a police scanner. So he starts to listen to the radio and hear when there's some sort of crime scene or accident, and there's a carjacking, and that's the first piece of footage that he gets, that he starts to film, and he brings it to a news program, and that's where we meet the morning news director, Nina, played by Renee Russo. who isn't in like enough things. Like I don't know. I like her.
Yeah,
I think
she's
good.
terrific in this.
Yeah, she's really good in this. I think she's also.
I'm trying to think. I know I've seen her in other things, but Major League. That's the one
like
that, she's
nothing.
in Major League.
Yeah, nothing recent though. That's the thing. Like, well, at least that in my memory. But apparently, she's also the director's wife, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm just looking. She was in Velvet Buzzsaw.
Oh, okay.
Which was
Another
movie that Dan Gilroy did.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, she's really good in this role, and so she plays the morning news director, and they have an interesting relationship. We'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, so that's where it starts, and he sells this footage to the news team, and that starts their working relationship, where he's filming this really up close and personal footage of these scenes and selling it to the news program. So he eventually hires someone to help him, and I want to mention who it is because I think he's really good in this role as well. All around,
Riz Ahmed plays the character.
Yeah, Riz Ahmed. He plays Rick. Rick, so it's who Lou hires on to help him and sort of be his second cameraman. When he's interviewing Rick, it just reminds me of like I don't know what kind of job interviews you've been on, but sometimes you'll meet someone and you just like, this person is playing themselves up. Like they learned how to sell themselves, like or fake it till you make it. I've been on interviews where I've just had those thoughts in my head. So that's what it reminded me of, that scene in the diner when Lou is interviewing Rick, and he's just like, I think he's maybe just sold like his first video to the news team or whatever, and he's like, we film breaking stories. What's her name? Video Production News. I love that name.
Which is so funny. It's so funny because Lou
generic.
is. What I love about Lou, and jumping around, but I think it's about this point in the movie. But there's a thing where he mentions that he read something on the internet.
Yeah, I read something on the
it seems
internet.
like I read something like he's always on the
Oh
internet,
my
and
God.
it kind of seems like
I'm always on the computer
because he just he just doesn't understand how actual human beings interact. So everything he does is derived from what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Like if you were to look up how to have a business conversation on the internet, it's like he just memorized.
Yeah, like
that.
he read a book or read something online.
It's all derived. He doesn't have any original. Yeah. I mean, he has original ideas, but it
they're all
seems
derived
like they're all derived from kind of a calculated calculated path that he's planned out for himself.
Yeah, so you see
he doesn't operate on feeling.
Yeah, and it's like sort of that psychopathic mentality where, I mean, look, selling yourself, more than you are is not like an absurd concept. It's perfectly, normal thing to do, but just the way that Lou does it and just, the way he talks about it, it's almost like, does he know that he's not established or anything? You know what I mean? Like the way he's talking about it is just like, this is who we are. This is what we do. It is, if you want to work for me, you got to do this. So
well, I think it's the thing where he doesn't understand people on a human level, but he understands motivation. Because I remember an experience I had where it was like right when I was out of college, I was just looking for a job and just looking to pick up some freelance work. And I had a friend who I had gone to school with who was like, I'm going to this thing and it's like a business person's meetup and there might be some freelance opportunities and stuff. And I went and it was this it was at a hotel. Like a Holiday Inn or something, and it was very clearly within 2 minutes of getting there I realized a big pyramid scheme, and I was like, all right,
I've done that
I don't
before.
want anything to do with I don't want anything to do with this, but I'll sit through it and kind of see maybe there'll be something interesting I can write into a screenplay or something like that. And the way that Lou talked throughout this movie kind of reminded me of like a lot of the people I met there, where it was this thing where it was maybe people who they kind of recognize that there's a certain desperation, and that by coming across really business-like and really I've been there and done that, and this is how you can get to where I am. They
Again,
can maybe
it's that psychopathic quality of like conveying yourself in one way, when you're really not. That way.
Which it doesn't have to be a psychopath doing it, but I think there's a certain thing where there are some people who will see vulnerability and they'll say, all right, I'm going to try to help this person and give them a little push or give them some advice. And there's also some people who will see vulnerability and say, I can use this to my advantage.
There's a way
and I think
to do it and still be humane. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with Lou. He sees the character's name was Rick, right? He sees in Rick a guy who just needs an opportunity.
He sees vulnerability for sure.
Yeah, he sees vulnerability. He sees a guy who's in a tight situation.
Yeah, Rick
and
is sort of
realizes.
Sorry, not to step on your thoughts. I was just gonna say Rick is he's sort of like a sad character to me.
Yeah, he just seems like
he's like
kind of where I was at, like coming out of college or something like that, like a young guy who just, you know, I mean, they don't say how old he is, but a young guy who, you know, is maybe just hit a point in his life. Once again, we don't get his backstory either.
Is he homeless or just like?
I don't know if he's homeless. I think he did at one point say I've been living in a garage.
Okay.
So I don't know if he's homeless, but it seems like, you know, if I were to invent a backstory, it seems like maybe he's a guy who was a little listless and maybe his parents finally gave him the boot and said, go figure it out on your own. And he's like living with a friend or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he's clearly someone who's at a point in his life where he's like, I need to do something with myself. If anything, just to survive in a better way than I am right now.
Because Lou tries to sell the position as an internship, right? And then so
Yeah,
he's not going to
and
pay
he's
him.
like-
He's like, man, I need something. Like, give me something.
Yeah, and he gives him $30 a night,
$30.
which I mean is negligible.
Right.
That's like,
But he's so
I remember
like Rick's so excited when he tells him that, like so happy, like, oh, thank you, like he's
yeah,
so
I think-
appreciative.
Yeah.
You know?
Not that it's the worst thing in the world
Yeah.
if you're just trying to get your first job
Yeah.
and you're a little bit of a drifter. $30 a night isn't
It's
terrible,
something, yeah.
but for the kind of work he's doing,
Yeah.
for the situations he's putting himself in,
Mhm.
it's like that alone is a little psychotic. But once again, it goes back to a guy who is just in need of something,
Yeah.
you know, in need of money, and Lou recognizes that and immediately takes advantage.
Yeah, it's an interesting counter character to Lou, I think, and the dynamic between them is interesting. And apparently, when they had auditioned for this role of Rick, the filmmakers got a lot of people who played the character sort of like a stoner character, you know, more
Yeah.
like almost more for comedy. But they said that Riz Ahmed, when he came in, he played it so sad. That they just like, all right, this is an interesting take. It's more like an abusive relationship between Lou and Rick. So that's interesting.
It does seem like even kind of from the beginning, you don't get the sense that Rick is the brightest bulb on the tree, but it does seem like he kind of gets that, like, it's not the best situation.
Yeah, he's like, there's something shady going on here, but
yeah, like pretty much the whole, like, there's not really any point in the film where Rick is just like, I'm just gonna go along with what this guy says. You know, I think it just is kind of that thing where he's like, shit, I need this opportunity. I'm screwed if I don't have this opportunity. And it's not ideal, but I'm gonna ride it out. But he's constantly pushing back, like whenever Lou is telling him to do some crazy shit,
That's
Rick
true.
is constantly, you know, even with the directions and things like that.
yeah.
He's just constantly pushing back. So I don't know. I think that's what it's that sadness of,
Which ultimately,
you know,
leads to his demise, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
we'll definitely get to that. So interesting character there and dynamic, and there's a couple other scenes I just wanted to hit on because I found them interesting. Well, first of all, there's the shooting scene with the home invasion, or what we believe to be a home invasion at this point, of a family that gets shot and murdered in their own home. And there's a very creepy scene here, and this you know, since we're talking about horror in this series, I want to at least mention this scene where Lou he starts filming from outside the house, and it's sort of like this house with a lot of glass windows. You know, it's like all the walls are glass, so you can see through, and he's filming it, and then he goes inside and he starts walking around the house. Or actually, I'm sorry, well, this actually does happen earlier. I want to mention there's a scene earlier where he does go inside a house, and he rearranges the photos on the fridge. I think this is also a shooting, but the family is, I think, dead at this point, and he rearranges the photos of the family on the fridge perfectly to align it with these bullet holes that he sees.
Yeah.
So he's breaking in to do this, essentially, and so that's the first inclination that we see for him to do this, and then we do see a scene later on where he actually goes into the house and right after a murder and is actually walking around the whole house. There's also like a baby's nursery. Luckily, the baby's not in there, but he goes into the baby's nursery. So yeah, just like these, you know, there are like scenes in this movie that are pretty horrific and sort of creepy of the character Lou kind of doing these sorts of things. So that's all. I just wanted to mention it because I thought it was
that. I feel like that scene in a weird way, because, you know, you talk about like the save the cat moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like that scene in a weird way was that for him. Not that he wouldn't have filmed it if there was a baby in there.
Oh,
but
he
somehow
told,
they're
yeah,
not
yeah.
But somehow they're not
that was
being
more
a baby in there
reprieve
made
for the audience, I think, than anything.
Yeah, like somehow there not being a baby in there made it seem like
it's like
what he did wasn't as evil.
Yeah,
even though it clearly
but like
still
he totally
was,
would have.
you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he would have, but by him not having done that, we were still enough on board.
I
with
felt
him.
like that was basically the filmmakers being like, okay, we don't need to we don't need to go that far, but we know you know, and we know what he would do.
He would have done it, in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and there's also a little moment I wanted to talk about. It's just a very brief part. It's not even a scene. It's just the ending of a scene, but it's after a scene where Lou's talking with Nina in the newsroom, and there's just a little moment where I think she walks away or something, and Lou goes and just sits down at the news anchor desk and kind of just looks at the camera. And I don't know, and again, creepy, right? It's just like, I don't know. It just gives you like that kind of feeling. It's like, where does he, and again, you don't know his thoughts, you don't know his backstory. So it's like, is it just like that image of himself on the camera that he sees, or is there something besides that? I mean, you really don't know what's going on in his head at that moment.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because he's a little bit of a contradiction in a way, because he clearly has a very big ego.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
It's clearly all about him. But there's the part where they're talking. He doesn't want to be a news anchor. He doesn't want to be in front of the camera. Yeah. Like his ego is that he wants to be behind the scenes, controlling everything.
Like controlling everything. There you go.
Yeah. Which is kind of a really interesting character detail.
It is,
because you see so many things about like sociopathic people in entertainment, and in this case, I'm talking. I think news is presented as entertainment. And so you see so many movies and hear so many stories about sociopathic people in entertainment, but it's always like they want to be the star. They always want to be the person, and it's like he doesn't really have a desire to be the star that everyone knows about. It's almost like his ego is he wants to be the star. Like he wants to be like the shadow star. Which we'll get into later because there's some the idea of shadow and darkness. I think is essential to talk about. But it is interesting just in terms of his character, that he sits at the news desk, but it's almost like it's more about I've made it to being able to sit here than this is where I'm picturing myself.
It's like I'm here. Like look at where I am. And it's a rare quiet. It's a rare like scene with no dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue in the film, and very, very good dialogue. But I thought it was interesting. They kind of just took this moment. I think it may have even been like an improvisation on the set or something like that.
Maybe.
But it's it's one of those moments I think kind of makes the movie in a way. Just having that quiet moment there with him, and it's like when he's looking at himself in the monitor, what does he see? Like what is he thinking? So I find that interesting. And then there's a very interesting date scene. I'm going to call it date in quotes there, where Lou, which
date for one, business meeting for the other.
Yeah, another scene I had forgotten about, because when I think back on the movie, I don't think of. I mostly just think of him with the camera, but there is this very interesting scene where Lou goes on what is sort of like a work date, or just sort of like a meeting between two people, with Nina, the news director, and the scene starts off innocently enough, and then within like a couple minutes, he's basically, I guess he's essentially blackmailing her to have sex with him, or he'll take his services elsewhere. It's kind of what he's laying out for her. And again, now they don't explicitly show anything like physical between them, but you get the idea that she went through with it.
What happens? Yeah.
So it's like now Nina's also a victim in his wake.
It's also interesting that relationship is really fascinating to me, because the thing I kept thinking about is like, why Nina? Because why? I mean, obviously, Renee Russo is a beautiful woman, but like, there's the whole thing. Like, she's much older than him. She's kind of established. She has a career. It's not like she was like the low hanging fruit who's kind of flirting with him, or like there was none of that. She was very clearly just like a professional presence in his life the entire time. And so it's like, I wonder what the thing driving that is. It just like she's the only woman who's talking to him?
I don't know. I think it's because she can see, she gives him compliments early on, and she kind of can see that he's good at what he does, and like it almost goes back to that kind of robotic thing of like, this is a woman who says nice things about me,
I've impressed her with my skills.
Now,
and so she
we
should
must
be my
go to
girlfriend.
bed. Yes, together.
Yeah, it's like it's such a weird, because it's like, once again, that thing that you see a lot of like egotistical men in the story. I feel like is always, oh, they're going like traditionally you would see him going for the news anchor.
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say.
That. Like like he's gonna go for the woman who culturally everyone else is pining after.
The one on camera.
But that's not who he goes for.
Yeah, and it is almost like Nina is looking at him like why why are you going for me? Like it's almost like she's wondering the same thing, like why you're not going for the news anchor. Like and I think part of her like is flattered by that, and I think that's why she even entertains his advances at first. Obviously it kind of becomes more about career, threatening her career, and she's scared. She's a character who's like very scared, I think, of like what's going to happen. I think that's why she's so ruthless in the film, is like, with even the footage that she presents, that Lou records, I think, it just shows how desperate she sort of is. And also just, to get into not to get into the whole thing about like TV news and 24-hour news and all that, but like clearly it is a show. And as you said, Jeremy, like it's all for entertainment really at the end of the day. And she knows that. And you can tell she's been in the business a while, and she's trying to make it work, she's trying to stay alive. And Lou is kind of her ticket to that, kind of her key, and he knows it, and he totally calls her out on it, and uses it to his
it's interesting
advantage.
With her. I feel like with her it's an interesting thing too, because I know that obviously in the interviews you read and everything, they didn't want to have this kind of character arc. They didn't want Lou to have the character arc, but it's interesting because in a way everyone around Lou has the character arc, and they're all just kind of darkened by his presence, because Rick obviously by the end is negotiating, which in the beginning we see him negotiate a little bit because he's like, I need to get paid, but as soon as an offer is made to him, which is just like a bullshit offer, he's like, oh, okay, cool, as soon as he got the littlest bit. And then later on, it's like when he gets a raise, he's about to say, I want $100 a night, and then he says 75 because he's scared. But as soon as like a line gets crossed, Rick all of a sudden is like really negotiating, and you see some of Lou in him. And it's the same thing with Nina, where at a certain point she goes from someone, it's almost like these people who are behaving in a kind of downtrodden way because of their circumstances, after a little while around Lou, start incorporating some of his evil because they realize that it works. That's interesting. So it's like it's interesting because it's not a movie, and I think that the minor characters in this film, which isn't always the case, are part of what makes it so compelling. Because I think if it was just Lou and we didn't see anyone else change, we just see Lou leaving this path of destruction, and everyone else gets like hurt by it constantly, it wouldn't be compelling. But the fact that he is actually making an impact in other people's lives, which isn't necessarily a positive impact in a human level, but like Nina's career is doing better by the end because of Lou.
Oh yeah, it's a success story.
It is. Like, ultimately,
anti-hero success story, but no, it's interesting to see how different characters react to Lou. And things like that. I mean, I think that's a big part of the dynamic of the film.
Though I do wonder, and I know we're jumping, I think at this point we've probably covered enough of the plot, because once again, as always on this show, we recommend watching the movie first, because it's a discussion podcast and we're not trying to avoid spoilers. But I do wonder, because you just mentioned, to jump to the ending, you mentioned it being a success story, and I was going back and forth on that, which I think I kind of forgotten that was the ending. Me too. I had forgotten as well. I think in my mind, I for some reason remembered it ending basically with him recording Rick on the ground. I had forgotten everything that came after that. And I was right after it finished, I found myself thinking about if it was a success story or not for Lou, because on the one hand, it appears to be on the surface. On the other hand, I was like, he's definitely going to get in trouble sooner rather than later.
So just so like everyone's on the same page, let's. And again, we don't really discuss narrative, like the plot, so much, but I do want to, particular scenes. I think we should at least explain like the ending scene.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So
I'm jumping.
Well, no, just because, it is so important, and everything that we're going to talk about after is probably going to involve it. So ultimately, the police start to become wise to what's going on, and me personally, when I was watching Lou's footage, I'm like, this is really graphic. Like, there's something, and also the fact that he's going into a house literally before the blood has even dried and is filming in there. I figured something was going to happen. And eventually the police, like these detectives, start to investigate Lou and what's going on. And, they want to see his footage and things like that. And Lou starts to, I guess, he's still holding things from them, but he starts to track the perpetrators of the home invasion. And so him along with Rick go and sort of follow them around. And then Lou calls the cops on them when they're in like this diner. And they, kind of fully knowing what's going to happen. And the police come and
he mentions that they're armed. Like
he mentions that they're armed. Yeah, he knows what's going to happen. And Rick knows, kind of looking at him, like knows what he's doing. And he's kind of like, what are you doing? And this is after he gives Rick a raise, of course, and a promotion.
But it is funny because, with Rick there, that is his opportunity to get out.
And it is. But like you said, he's so far in now, and I think he's...
Yeah.
I don't know. I think part of characters like Lou because it seems like he is a character who gets what he wants, and I think that comes across. People don't...
Well, I guess Lou did kind of threaten him, too.
Also that, yeah.
He did threaten him, but it's still, it's like, you feel like, as far as we know, Lou isn't carrying a gun around or anything. Like, our guy very easily could have gotten out of the car.
Yeah, but you're right. Know? Lou does threaten violence against Rick. I remember that in that scene. So he's kind of like, you're going to... Or I forget if it's that scene or before it, but he's kind of like, you're going to get the shot, Like, he's telling him you're going to do it. So anyway, so the ending of the film is essentially that there's this big... When the police arrive at the diner where the perpetrators are of the home invasion, there's this big shootout and a car chase and all of that. And it ends with a big accident, and the police are in the accident, and the perpetrators are, essentially, I think one of them's dead after the accident, and one of them we think is dead because Lou tells Rick that he's dead, like he's dead, get the shot. So Rick, just unknowingly starts filming, and he walks up to the car, and the perpetrator's still alive, and he pulls out his gun and shoots Rick, and Rick dies. Well, he's dying at this point. So Lou not only films the ensuing police shootout, which ends with the perpetrator dying, but also films Rick himself. And Rick, he's still alive at this point. He's kind of dying. He says, you saw him, meaning he knew that the guy was still alive. So yeah, a very heavy scene, and I had forgotten about it. But it's like the perfect ending, really. How else could it have gone, really, when you think back on it? From that very first scene where Lou steals where he beats up the security guard and steals the watch. Again, it's just like, that's why it's a surprising scene, but you understand that of course he would do this. Of course this would happen. Yeah. Because Lou is a character who he's only about getting what he wants, and he doesn't let morals get in the way, or friendship, or anything like that. So yeah, pretty heavy. But sorry, what did you want to say about the? I guess, did you want to say something about the death of Rick, or something about the scene in particular?
I don't know. Yeah, just looking at Rick and how he did kind of have an opportunity to get out of there. But I don't know. I'm just it's kind of a new thought that's popping into my head now. But it does feel like the idea of Lou being a thief, and thinking about it, because it does seem like he's kind of stealing Rick's image at the end. He's kind of manufactured it and is stealing it. And going back to the very beginning with him stealing the watch, I'm just kind of noticing.
Oh, that's
I guess I didn't think of it as the idea of Lou being a thief, but as I'm thinking of it now and kind of going through it, it does. There's this idea of a camera that I know in some cultures they talk about, like a camera being the thing that steals your soul, and it's interesting because the idea of I don't know, just Lou as a thief, how he's essentially taking people's tragedy and turning that into his product. It's like, it's all earned. You can't. The one thing you can't say about him is that he doesn't work hard. He is earning it all, but he's stealing. It's this weird thing where it's like he's almost the. I don't know.
And then he chastises Rick for negotiating his salary.
Yeah. It's almost that thing. It's like, really, it's fine when I do it.
Really kick a man when he's down. Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all kinds of parallels you could draw too, without getting too much into it, between Lou and the idea of
capitalism.
Capitalism and large corporate entities, especially with the language he uses.
Well, it's like go for it. Get the job you want, and make all the money you
Yeah.
can, but like, hey, how dare you try to negotiate your salary with
Yeah,
her?
like Lou almost talks like an HR department.
Yeah, he does.
You know
Yeah,
what
he
I mean?
does
Like
in
an
that
HR
scene. You're right,
department
for
a
sure.
huge company,
Yeah.
where it's like he's very encouraging when you're helping them, but the minute you do something against the company, even if it's exactly what the company is
You're
doing,
fired.
you've crossed a line and you have to be terminated.
You have to be terminated.
or you
Yeah.
know, you have to be terminated. And I think that like that's because that's the thing. It's like it's tough because I on the one hand, I do know there are people like Lou out there with that level of sociopathy, but it's like the just how dense he is like that to me is what kind of makes it feel like it's digging at this kind of bigger metaphor of, you know, how labor is exploited and how the kind of the common person is exploited, and at the end he is a corporate entity.
Totally,
he's a company,
and he's completely exploited.
You know?
Yeah, it's like the footage of him dying, and just as much exploited as a person can be, I guess, at that point. It's pretty rough. And then you have a scene after that, which it's sort of I don't know, taking TV news to task a little bit, when Nina is told the reality of the home invasion. So not only has, you know, throughout the movie she's been watching this entirely graphic footage and being like, put that on the air, you know, there's been someone in the background kind of telling her, Nina, I don't think we should do that. But no, at this point, this guy...
But no one stops her, because they all also know that they're going to lose their jobs if, you know...
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we do this or we fail. So so she, you know, is constantly doing this throughout the movie, and the last scene with her is that same person telling her that the home invasion, or what they thought was a home invasion, was actually drug-related, and that the homeowners had the stash of cocaine or whatever it was, drugs in the house. And she just goes, no, we're not going to report that. We're going to stick with our narrative. That it was urban crime encroaching on suburban life. You know, that's her focus. She tells Lou that in her first scene, that's what their news channel is after. That's what she's after, I guess, as a news director. I just found that really, like, you know, it's kind of like a little jab there at, you know, and you can look at the whole movie that way, really, at sort of like this critique on not only on these sort of sociopathic people, but also just the news cycle in general and news media, which we could get into a whole episode about. But so I like that little touch there, that little detail. And so this is basically the end of the movie here, where you know, he negotiates a price, sells his footage, and basically there's also an interrogation scene with Lou, which is very interesting, but I won't get into it because that's going to take even more time. But he does proceed to lie about everything, of course. And so I do want to ask you, Jeremy, there's a shot when he comes out of the interrogation. Is that the only shot during the day? Wait, I'm sorry. I'm just remembering now. There is a couple.
There are a few shots during the day, but I think that's one of the only shots where he's in sunlight.
Yeah.
Like, I think if there's most of the shots during the day,
like a quick shot of him on the beach earlier, but
which is actually a perfect transition to start talking about why we selected this as part of our not horror series. Because we haven't really gotten into that too much yet. But so there are a couple things I noticed about that shot, because once again, that was a shot I did not remember, but that scene that really struck me. So a couple things with that.
He puts on his sunglasses and just like walks away down the street, right?
Yeah. So one thing with that scene that I noticed is he's still in the shadows the whole time.
Okay.
It was a really subtle thing I noticed, but he's like, he's out in this, like, maybe right when he puts the sunglasses on, but when you see him walking away, there's like a massive shadow, and it's like that. To me, that's a choice that you don't have him crossing over into the sunlight, even when it's daytime. He's still in the dark.
That's good.
Yeah, so I thought that was a really nice little touch, which, you know,
he stays in the
Dan
dark.
Gilroy as a filmmaker, and also
he puts on the sunglasses too, right? So
and also just want to note Robert Elswit, the cinematographer, who also shot most of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies.
Very good.
So I have no doubt that he was making some really significant character choices with the lighting and framing. But also that sunglasses moment really kind of struck a chord for me in terms of this as a horror movie. And the reason is it struck me that our main character, Lou, here is essentially a vampire. And it kind of really, like the parallel between him and vampirism really struck me there, and that's why I think this resonates as a piece of horror, because it's like, you look at it and it's someone who thrives and lives off of blood, and he can only come out at night. You know, like there's those real. He literally at one point they say he works the vampire shift.
He has to keep it dark,
and it's like, he has to. And the movie has Nightcrawler, and it's just this idea of, like, I think looking at this as a monster movie is a really interesting way to examine it because, you know, obviously he's not, you know, he doesn't have scales or, you know, he's not a Frankenstein or anything like that. But the idea of him as a ruthless monster who feeds on the blood of innocent victims is really, you know, I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense.
It's horrific. It's horrific, and it really is a success story because the movie ends with Lou now leading a whole team of video production news.
Well,
and they all drive away.
The vampire.
Yeah.
To go to the vampire metaphor, that's everyone he bites.
Exactly.
Everyone
like
he
they're all
bites
infected
turns into
with
a vampire.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And if you look at everyone he comes in contact with, Nina, Rick, once they get bitten by the Lou bug, you know, once he bites them, they start becoming that. You know, they become darker. They become more creatures of the night. Yeah,
and then he has this whole production team, and they all drive away into the night, their first night on the job. So yeah, it's a success story.
Although I still stand by the idea that I give it like 6 months before he ends up in jail. Or,
well, it's only a matter of time, like, you know, because it's very obvious, at least to me, that the detectives are pretty onto him at this point. Like they know, they know something.
He's very calculated, but he's also very reckless, and it seems like it's it's a success story. But I don't know if it's a happy ending for Lou Bloom.
As far as we know,
I don't think there is. Yeah, I don't think there is a happy ending for Lou Bloom. Eventually, it might not be right away, but eventually he's going to do something. You know, and it's funny because eventually what's going to happen, I think, is Lou Bloom is going to bump up against a bigger, more powerful Lou Bloom. You know, like someone, you know, like there's no way the person running the news channel is any less sociopathic than Lou Bloom. You know, it's like that, and eventually he's going to try to screw the wrong person, and
I can see that
come crumbling down.
Yeah, in the end, he gets swallowed up. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, because you know, Lou ultimately he started as a no one, but you have people with the same kind of attitude and philosophy as Lou who start with a lot of money and a lot of, you know, connections, and it's like those are the people who can get themselves to a position that they can't get knocked down from. It's like Lou, probably someone's gonna get to him eventually.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure. So yeah, that's Nightcrawler. Directed and written by Dan Gilroy, and as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, his directorial debut. So yeah, written and directed by him. And you know, I think it's a great script. I could see like someone reading the script and you know, being kind of blown away by it. And as you mentioned, the cinematographer,
Robert Elswit.
Robert Elswit.
He's by far my favorite cinematographer.
Oh yeah,
of all time. I'm totally obsessed.
He's great. And so, you know, and as we mentioned, like all the performances in the movies in this film are very good, but it's really like at the end of the day, like it really is Jake Gyllenhaal. I feel like, in my opinion, at least, who makes the film really something to watch. Like it's just every scene is just him. You know, you just you kind of captivated by him. His performance is so central to the film itself that it's almost like they're one and the same. Like you know, I feel like his performance, it just really conveys what they were going for with the film. And apparently Jake Gyllenhaal, he was very dedicated to the role and just, I guess, I don't know if he was just very interested in the idea of it or what, but he was very involved with like the casting and things like that. And there's, you know, a lot of things you can read online of like, you know, you read about method actors and things like that. And he did a lot of things, like he lost a ton of weight for the film. Yeah. I think he just ate like kale salads and chewing gum or something like that. You know, very extreme.
Which is funny because I definitely could see Lou.
Yeah.
Like reading online that kale is the healthiest that you can eat, and just eating kale.
I was gonna say it's very extreme, but then so is Lou.
Like what is a healthy diet to be an effective human being is the Google search.
But he also there's a reason for it. He wanted to give the character of Lou Bloom this sort of like animalistic kind of they compared him a lot to Coyote, sort of seeking prey, you know, kind of stalking around the streets of LA and stuff.
Well, I noticed that throughout the whole movie, and maybe this is just Jake Gyllenhaal, and I've never noticed it before, but, you know, knowing how hard he worked on this character, that Lou always has his head kind of sticking out forward in a kind of weird way.
Like animalistic.
Like his posture is kind of like, it just feels like he's always straining a little bit, almost like he's like listening. You know, and so I
like
don't know.
he's sniffing the air for prey. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, I could be kind of making that up in Jake Gyllenhaal. Maybe just his head just sits a little further forward, or I just imagine the whole thing.
No, I feel like that
totally
is
normal.
something. No, because
Yeah,
I feel like
there's something. I've seen Jake Gyllenhaal enough other stuff where there's something in his posture in this that he was clearly doing.
For sure. Like he was like you could tell he was super into the role, and he also apparently. I mean, I'm sure actors memorize scripts, but he's apparently he memorized it like a play. Like he just had like every beat down, and so he was definitely invested in it and was very involved with it. And I wanted to talk about, mentioning the coyote and the animal sort of motif. That also, now I think about it, the film Collateral had some of that. You ever see the film Collateral with Tom Cruise and Jamie?
No,
Jamie
I've been wanting to. I've been on a big Michael Mann kick lately, and that was on my watch list. But
that's one to watch. Yeah, and there's a lot of imagery. I think they even have like a coyote stalking around the streets of LA. So it's sort of, it's sort of like hungry, like. Kind of like get what you want sort of thing.
Right. Maybe that'll be tomorrow's movie.
There you go. Well, you've been on a Michael Mann kick, right? So
I have.
So there's the animalistic approach to the acting, and also we talked about Elswit, the DP. He in filming the movie he could sort of approach it like a wildlife documentary. So that's why there's very little use of like he used a wide angle lens and very little I think he used like depth of field. Like he avoided soft focus. Everything's pretty much in focus. Like it's very deep focused to bring about that sense of that you're watching sort of like a wildlife or animal documentary, which is sort of like in the back of your head, like not something you would notice, especially the first time you watched it, but once I became aware of that, I was like, oh, okay, I can see that,
But it is funny because Lou is constantly saying wide angle.
Yeah, he does say that.
Kind of, So he's
steady hands and wide angle.
They shot it how Lou would have wanted.
Exactly. Yeah, and to go along with that, so not only did they shoot the movie the way Lou would have wanted it to be shot, but the music in the film is actually supposed to be so. At first, because when you listen to the music in the film, you kind of, at least in my head, I was kind of like, oh, that was an interesting choice, or sort of like an odd choice. Because it's almost like triumphant, the music. It's sort of very cinematic, which is not something you would associate with this kind of film or with like sort of more documentary type films. But the reasoning for that I found very interesting is that all the music cues are actually supposed to be in Lou's head. So
interesting.
So for example, when he gets like his first big shot, he's like filming on like some car wreck or something, it's like this triumphant music in the background, even though there's like this bleeding victim that he's filming, it's like that juxtaposition between what we're seeing and how Lou feels about it, in his own head, like I got the shot, like this is gonna be great, I'm going places. That's interesting. Because at first the music threw me off a little bit. I'm like, oh, I didn't really think it would go in that direction, but there's a reason for it having such a cinematic score, I guess you could say, that I found pretty interesting. So I mean, we talked about like at the beginning of the show, we talked about the movie's relevancy, and like I said, with the proliferation of cell phone footage that you see on the news all the time now, I think it just only proves this movie more relevant and I think
foreshadowing. You never know how a movie is going to age until it's been around for probably 20 or 30 years. But this is one of those ones where if you were going to ask me to hedge bets on movies that will age well over time ideologically and become more and more relevant, I feel like this is one that will unfortunately only become more illuminating as to what is happening in the world as time goes by.
Unfortunately. I mean, there was part of me that was, as I watched the movie, I was kind of like, would they really show this on the news? But then, I don't know.
But I don't know.
I know they blur out faces and things like that, but even then, it's still pretty graphic.
Yeah, that is, there's a little bit of suspension of disbelief. But what I will say is...
Unless it's supposed to be like the near future, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, but what I will say, I recently was listening to, or I don't remember what it was, watching something about, about news, and this movie came out and was probably in theaters when the Sandy Hook shootings happened. And I remember when that happened, them interviewing the parents of children who had just died. So it's like, it's one of those things where we say, is this going too far? but then, you know, to be realistic, but then literally when a few months after this movie came out, you had people being interviewed within hours of the worst thing that could possibly happen on the planet.
Well,
you know, it's like yeah, maybe like how graphic it is went too far, but how much it exploits someone, how much it puts on display.
For sure, yeah.
You know, it doesn't like that. Like that's why I think it's believable. Is it's like maybe they wouldn't show the blood and guts, but they'll show the emotional blood and guts.
The emotional blood and guts. You're right.
That might just be in this case. It's just an expressionistic choice. Of what is already
it
happening.
gets the point across for sure, and it's certainly not much of a leap to to think that TV again, like maybe this is the near future, maybe this is where we're headed. I really don't know. I really hope not.
Well, and this isn't just I'm not trying to just indict the news either. I think there's just
there's better.
Obviously, if you can only if you're pointing you can only point the finger at the news if you don't watch it. You know, and it's like I think all of us to a certain. You know, it's like all of us are the audience. You know, as long as we keep tuning into these.
I try not to. In my defense, I will.
I try not to also. But
I know, but you have to stay. It's tricky because you have to stay informed, right? So.
Yeah, you have to stay informed, and I think as long as there are people who are curious about the most tragic and despicable aspects of
as long as people
humanity in a real way, and who aren't just stepping back and saying, "Let me read about it in the paper a week from now when." We know more about it, as long as we want to get that kind of immediate, instant gratification and Schadenfreude, I believe is the word, the kind of the catharsis through other people's pain. It's like they'll keep doing this, and in that sense, Lou is no more culpable than anyone else. He's just a part of the cycle.
As long as people tune in and click and whatever, it's. Again, it's like not it's a little extreme in this film, like the way they present it, but at the same time, it's not that far.
Well, yeah, because it's like if the thing that sold was a Girl Scout troop selling the most cookies, Lou would be shooting that, and he'd be a great guy. But that's but ultimately that's not what the
hopefully more wholesome movie.
Lou clearly because I don't think Lou has an obsession with the macabre. I don't get the sense that he's someone like that. I think it's just that he's opportunistic. He's a capitalist.
Yeah, it's like in the beginning of the movie, he's doing something else that is immoral, but he thinks is going to get him somewhere, or at least make him money.
Because there are definitely people out there who are like would be doing this kind of job because they have some kind of a dark fascination with it or something. But I don't think that's Lou. I think it's just whatever sells.
Lou is, he's a scavenger. He really is like a coyote. Like he just whatever is the weakest prey, he'll go after.
He'll go after, the path of least resistance.
Exactly. So it's certainly a very intense and engaging watch. I really enjoyed. This was my second time seeing Nightcrawler, and I really enjoyed it. If not the same, or like probably even more than the first time I saw it. Mostly because I was really analyzing it, for the show, obviously. But
it's a great discussion movie.
It really is.
I don't know if this is necessarily a movie night movie that you watch with a bunch of your friends. But
it's not a cult film in the same way like a lot of our movies are cult films. But it really
it's not a good movie to get like drunk and laugh at. But it's a great one to watch with your friends who really enjoy getting into some kind of philosophical discussions because. We've been talking for over an hour at this point,
and we could go,
and I have no doubt that we could go for another hour or much longer on this one. So really thought provoking.
It really is. The movie itself is really like a car crash where you don't want to look, but at the same time you can't look away. Like it feels like that, which is appropriate.
But like a smart car crash, like you're in good hands,
Yeah.
But you can't look away.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough subject matter, but the performances. And the script, I think, really make it like a cult film.
Yeah, beautifully written.
Yeah,
I would love to see a novelization of this.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Personally,
like with inner monologue and everything. Or?
I don't know. I'm kind of back and forth on that, but I feel like it would be really interesting to see how this would function if it was written out. I mean, I'm sure the script does that, but yeah, maybe a first person. It's probably an awful idea because so much of it is how we only get a
maybe that would
take
away from it, but no, it would be.
But I'd also be really curious, and obviously no one could write it.
Yeah.
But
that's the thing. Like it's human nature. Like I understand. Like a lot of people in different forms of media, they prefer a lot of backstory, right? Like I think it's just human nature to know about the character you're watching and to make. It helps you feel more invested, I guess, in the character.
Yeah.
But for me personally, like I've never really subscribed to that. I kind of feel like characters where you don't know their backstory are almost more
Yeah.
interesting. But again, like
It depends.
it really
depends on
does
the
depend.
character.
Like I'm not saying everything has to be like that, because then
Yeah.
that would get old and boring, obviously.
Yeah.
But
No,
but
yeah,
when
I
it
think
happens,
there's some people.
like like or like the Joker in The Dark Knight, like how he had no backstory, or you didn't know what his backstory was because he made it up every
Yeah.
time. Like stuff like that is intriguing. And again, not
Mm-hmm.
everything can be like that. Not every character can be like that. But in certain instances, and Nightcrawler is certainly one of them, I think it just works so well. Where you just, and I think part of that is because I am such a fan of documentaries and sort of like fly on the wall documentaries where you really are just watching what's happening. And so I have that, I don't know, I like that voyeuristic approach.
Yeah.
And that's another reason I think I really respond to this
Which
film.
works too,
Yeah.
because that's what Lou is a voyeur.
Yeah.
He's filming other people.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
I think there is something
Thematically,
it's
it
like
makes sense,
when
yeah.
when he shoots footage, we don't get the backstory of these people. The news, as we saw later on, the news creates the backstory.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. They'll
so
make it
it's
whatever
like,
they want it to be. So
we're watching Lou through the same lens that he's watching everyone else. We're just there.
Yeah.
We showed up and just happened to follow him around
Right.
for this stretch of his life.
Yeah.
And that's it. We figure out our own context.
Yeah, and there is so much more we could say about this film, but we'll have to stop there. Or the
We should
the episode.
before we wrap up, we should, because this is the end of our series.
Let's wrap. Yeah.
So, well, I guess first off, Mark, any specific images or moments that just you maybe want to bring attention to before we move on?
For this film, you mean?
For this film,
Yeah,
and then we can go to the.
I mean, again, the scene where he's sitting at the news anchor desk. I just like that
Yeah.
kind of quiet moment. We didn't really talk about the scene where he breaks the mirror, or like shatters the mirror. I'm honestly, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like I like, it again. It's sort of like the Taxi Driver thing, where like anti-hero. And again, you don't see him like talking to himself in the mirror or anything like that. I guess I do find it interesting that he does, like, why, because it does leave that question in your head, like, what, why did he do this? I guess you don't really see him act out like that any other point in the movie, so it almost feels a little out of, I don't know, it's a little jarring. Like, it's.
Well, it's just seeing actual emotion.
Yeah, it's seeing an actual emotion, which is weird.
It's not calculated. Everything.
But even that, I feel like maybe they showed too much. Even that, you know what I mean? Like, maybe we should know he's angry. I don't know. That's just me being like, I like really cryptic things. Like I like David Lynch and Twin Peaks. So I like really cryptic things. But so to me, that was almost too much to show that. I do appreciate that Jake Gyllenhaal really broke the mirror, and actually, I think he actually injured himself. At that point.
And the mirror fell beautifully.
Oh, I mean, it's a great.
As a film lover, I can appreciate.
And look, as a film lover, I mean, there are so many great like character in front of the mirror scenes in movies. So I get it. Like I get the inclination to put that a scene like that in there, but that was the only scene that doesn't entirely work for me.
Yeah, it definitely could have been.
It's super short. Like it's super quick, but yeah. But anyway,
it could have been. There's a moment in the more recent Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix,
I was just thinking about that too. Yeah.
Where he's like about to cry or something, and then he just forces a smile onto his face. And I feel like something like that, where we're like about to see Lou explode, and then he's just like, could have been. But
keeps you
honestly,
guessing.
at the same time though, I don't know if in a movie like this, not seeing one emotional moment from him might have just been like too alienating.
Maybe, I don't know, but
so I don't know. It's in the movie. It's a beautiful film, and I trust that it was there.
It's a good shot. But yeah, you asked like what other moments stand out. I guess I don't know, the way he reacts with or interacts with the character Rick. Like there's some scenes where he's really scary, just talking to Rick in the car. Like just the way he's talking to him and things like that stood out to me. And
so menacing.
Yeah, so menacing. But how about you? Were there any things that stood out?
So the moments that are coming to mind. I'm just gonna look at my notes here really quick and see if there was anything else. So one, kind of two little moments that I thought were cool. One is this, because I'm going to keep going back to Robert Elswit, because I do. Well, I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal definitely carries this movie, but I think the cinematography is just doing so much work here.
Sure.
But this also could be a writing thing. I don't know who came up with this, but there's one sequence pretty early on in the movie where we see a few shots just outside. I think we're maybe seeing like a satellite dish or something like that. It's daytime. And then we cut to Lou just sitting in his apartment watching television, and he's sitting in the dark. And I just thought that was really cool. He's sitting in the dark with like one little lamp on, and I just thought that was such a beautiful character thing. Is that like going back to the vampire motif, just establishing that so early on that it's the middle of the day in Los Angeles, which, you know, for anyone who hasn't been there, has like the most beautiful sunlight on the planet, and he's just choosing to sit in the dark in the middle of the day. Yeah, he prefers the dark. So I thought that was really cool. And then I just want to shout out the montage when he's kind of starting to do well. I just thought that was a really cool montage. I think that I love montages like that, like the getting better montage, particularly when it's a character who you're like not supposed to be rooting for, but he has a little bit of that like Rocky training. You know,
again,
which I just thought was really cool in this kind of movie, because you don't really notice it at the time, but watching it a second time, I was like, oh, that's really funny. Like, this is oh, Lou is doing it. He's succeeding. It's exciting. But then, like, you see what he's doing, and it's very disturbing.
Yeah, and again, like, the music, like the triumphant music.
Yeah,
and all, yeah, of course.
So, yeah, I'm someone who just really loves a little bit of Kish played off of really dark things thematically.
That's something we didn't really talk about at all. That this movie's very funny, I think. Like,
it's super funny.
Like, it's definitely, like, part dark comedy, I would say.
Yeah. Like, it's not, like, haha funny, but there's a lot of shit in it. It's, like... It's, you know, it's funny in the way like Hereditary is funny.
Yeah, like,
you know,
yeah, like some of the lines they say are you don't know. It's just the way it's very well written film.
Yeah, and just the behavior and the kind of it's like I really like Ruben Östlund, the director. I don't know, Mark, have you seen his movies like Force Majeure or Triangle of Sadness?
No, I haven't
The
actually.
Square. I think you would really like those actually. But it's the kind of the same thing where it might be dealing with something. Although his movies are more, I would say, more comedies than anything else, but it's this kind of dry humor where it's just like when you look at human behavior close enough, but and almost like Lou is interesting because he's such a not human, you know, that by looking at someone who it's almost like he's like an alien trying to be a human, or it's the same kind of humor, you know, which once again, why this could be prescient in years to come, is like when you plug something into an AI, you know, they have all these AIs now that can like write, and you ask it to write a screenplay, and it writes something so ridiculous because it's trying to be a human but isn't, and it could be writing a script about something really serious, but just because it doesn't understand human emotion, it's going to do something that's inherently funny. And I think there are a lot of moments like that where it's just funny because Lou is just so not human that it draws attention to how weird actual human behavior is, that I think it can just be really weirdly funny at times.
And I like that the movie's hard to define in that it does fit all these different styles, sort of like you know, it's a character piece, it's a drama, it's a thriller, it's a dark comedy, it's horror, well,
kind of,
you know,
but not
but not to end our series, you know. It's not a horror film, but it is certainly horrific. And the films, you know, all the films that we talked about in the series, I think fit that mold. I think they're all very different from each other, but all have those similar themes and similar things that make them horrific. And I don't even know if I have a conclusion, but you know, just thinking about it, I think everything made sense. You know, and I think everything that we talked about had its place. But you know, does anything stand out to you as maybe like a defining last minute summary that we can make, because we did not prepare for this part of the episode?
Well, I just think one thing I just kind of found myself thinking about is just the idea of opportunity, especially now. You know, we're hitting a point where horror, although it's still, I think, in many ways and by many people looked down upon as like kind of
a lesser
the ugly stepchild of more prestigious cinema. But I think we're starting to reach a point where horror films are really taken seriously, and you're seeing prominent directors and actors working in horror. And I think, you know, the movies like the ones we've talked about in this series maybe kind of predict a future in a way where, because there doesn't have to be this distinction, and don't get me wrong, I love horror and I hope that horror films, capital H horror films, never go away. But I think that, you know, what we've seen in this series is that there is an opportunity for filmmakers and writers and everyone, you know, not just the books, anything, in the future where you can take this idea of horror and scary things and use them to tell interesting stories that don't just have to be about the scares. They can just kind of weave in these darker aspects of the human condition to get to something more.
And it doesn't have to be about traditional monsters or creatures, although that's all well and good. I mean, I do enjoy a good monster movie, but that's not what we were talking about here. You know, we're talking about different types of monsters, which take the form of humans or take the form of, you know, whatever it may be, subject matter that we've talked about, you know, different things, but psychological things even. But I think those could still be horror films, and I think we sort of proved that with the series. And or if not, you know, at least it was just an interesting way to look at these movies. Or maybe next time you're watching a movie, you'll think of it in a different light, or, you know, is this maybe, you know, sort of horrific or a different genre maybe than I originally thought, or, you know, just looking at things from different angles. I'm not a big label guy. Like, I don't like putting labels on things, and you know, so I think there's always multiple ways to look at things and multiple genres going on.
Well, particularly in a medium, and especially in the American film industry, where labeling is so important because that's how movies are sold.
For sure, yeah.
It's just exciting to see works of art that are allowed to exist outside of that.
Yeah.
And in the case of most of these movies, everything with the exception of Bug, I guess, which was kind of overlooked in its time a little. But, like, you know, Nightcrawler, Jacob's Ladder, and Eraserhead were all very successful
in their own
movies.
rights, yeah.
In their own rights. And so I think it's just, you know, the fight, I guess the fight we're fighting here is that it's good to blur genre. And
that's what I was going to say.
You know,
like,
it's exciting.
The blurring of the line is what's exciting and interesting. Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. So, and Jeremy, I know, like, as a filmmaker, you've dabbled with horror, and I've done it as well in my writing projects. And so I always like when there's elements of horror, even if it isn't traditional horror or what you would expect, because that's boring to get always what you expect. So it's good to try different things and look at it in different ways. And yeah, I think this series hopefully opened people up to that, or at least made people think of things in different ways. So.
Or just affirmed what you already knew, but gave you extra resilience.
You were probably way ahead of us. You already knew all this.
Put your foot down and speak up for it. So
yeah, it was just, you know, it was just a fun idea we had, and I think it turned into a pretty good series. So thank you as always, Jeremy, and we'll get to work on the next one soon. But for now, did you have any, I guess, closing thoughts on the series as a whole?
No,
that's pretty much it. Yeah,
covered it.
Horror is in all forms. You just have to look for it, I guess. It's a comforting thought to end on. Just look around you. No.
Look around you. It's all scary.
Everything is horrific. It kind of is true. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Anyway. Especially if you turn on the news. All right. No more about the news.
Yeah. All right. No more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, as always, for listening to the series and this episode. And we'll be back with a whole new series, hopefully very soon. We'll let you know. But for now, thank you for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on the usual social media. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult, be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.